All right, so here we are starting on our discussion of ATC Section 105, which explains the concepts common to all attestation engagements. So what is an attestation engagement? It's basically one in which a CPA is engaged to issue or does issue a practitioner's examination, review, or agreed upon procedures report on a subject matter or an assertion about a subject matter that's hereinafter referred to as an assertion that is the responsibility of another party. So there's three types of attestation engagements. These are the examination, review, or agreed upon procedures. And so basically, if we are the CPA, then our client makes an assertion about a subject matter, and that subject matter is the responsibility of someone else besides us, and we issue a report about whether that assertion is correct or not. So let's go down to some of the definitions, and we can get some more specific understanding on exactly what this means. Okay, so now we're down in the definitions section, and let's just run through several of the definitions and that are relevant to where we are now in this section. A lot of it will be a lot more clear as we go through it, I believe. So an assertion is any declaration or set of declarations about whether the subject matter is in accordance with or based on the criteria. So there's definitions for subject matter and criteria later on, and we'll see those. But first, let's first understand what an attestation engagement is. And so it's an examination, a review, or an agreed upon procedures engagement here. That's performed under the attestation standards, that's what we're going through right now, related to a subject matter or an assertion that is the responsibility of another party. And so since this video series is specific to agreed upon procedures, let's understand what an agreed upon procedures engagement is. It's an attestation engagement, which we read right here, in which a practitioner, that's us, performs specific procedures on subject matter or an assertion, which we defined above, and reports our findings without providing an opinion or a conclusion on it. And so the parties to the engagement, the specified party, as defined later in this paragraph, agreed upon and are responsible for the sufficiency of the procedures for their purposes. So basically the responsible party, or rather the specified party, who is our client, has hired us and told us what procedures that they would like us to perform, and we agreed to perform those procedures. And then we go and perform those procedures on the subject matter with the understanding that the subject matter is in accordance with a certain assertion or criteria. And then we report back to the specified party our findings on whether that turned out to be the case. So let's go back, and we'll see how that works later on in the videos. But let's go through a few more of the definitions here. Criteria is the benchmarks used to measure or evaluate the subject matter. The engaging parties are the parties that engage us to perform the attestation engagement. And the practitioner is basically us, the person or persons conducting the attestation engagement. It's usually the engagement partner or the members of the engagement team, or as applicable to the firm. And each of these have a different definition as well, and we can go through those later. The specified party is the intended user to whom use of the written practitioner's report is limited. The subject matter is the phenomenon that is measured or evaluated by applying the criteria. And the responsible party is a party responsible for the subject matter. So if the nature of the subject matter is such that no such party exists, a party who has a reasonable basis for making a written assertion about the subject matter may be deemed to be the responsible party. Okay, so now that we have that understanding of several different definitions, I know that was quick, but as we get into the meat of this, we will begin to understand each of these terms a little better. So let's go back up to the requirements. Okay, so now we're back up into the requirements, and we can reread this one with our newfound understanding of several different terms. So this section applies to engagements in which CPA in the practice of public accounting is engaged to issue or does issue a practitioner's examination, review, or agreed upon procedures report on subject matter or an assertion about subject matter that is the responsibility of another party. And so this reference paragraph A1 provides us some examples of scenarios or different types of subject matter that might have an assertion placed on them that we would need to perform these procedures for. So let's go down to that particular section. Okay, so now we're down in the explanatory material here related to some examples of subject matter that we might be engaged to perform an attestation engagement over. So to give us a good scenario to understand the different parties to the transactions, as well as make it easier for us to understand why we might go about analyzing these subject matter examples, let's pretend that maybe we are engaged by the owner of a company, and maybe he doesn't take part or closely manage the company. And so he's our specified party, so the person who has engaged us to perform this engagement. And now he's concerned about specific subject matter at the entity that is the responsibility of management. So management may be the responsible party. And so he wants us to go in and analyze the subject matter and perform certain procedures to give him comfort that the subject matter is in line with a certain criteria or assertion. And so the responsible party, management, has told us the assertions of the subject matter, so what amounts or what criteria these subject matter are in line with. And so we have to go in and find out if that's true, and then we report back to the specified party, who's the owner of the company, and tell him whether or not these subject matters were in line with what management says they are. So anyway, some examples of these might be historical or prospective performance or condition. For example, historical or prospective financial information, performance measurements, and backlog data. So for instance, management might have told him that the company returned a certain amount of money or a certain return, and so we would go in and confirm whether that's true or not, and we would tell the owner yes or no, it's accurate. Also, it might be physical characteristics, for example, narrative descriptions or square footage of facilities. So maybe we would need to go in and measure the square footage of facilities or obtain blueprints or something like that, and report back to the owner and say whether the amount that management says is the square footage is actually the square footage or not. Some other examples might be historical events, for example, price of a market basket of goods on a certain date, different analysis, so break-even analysis, internal controls, or behavioral type stuff. For instance, compliance with laws and regulations or human resources practices, where we might go in and see whether the entity is in compliance with laws and regulations as management has told the owner. So we see that there's a lot of different situations where we could be hired to go in and provide some sort of attestation engagement over different types of subject matter. And there are also several types of attestation engagements that do not fall within the ATC sections. These include litigation services that involve pending or potential legal or regulatory proceedings. And that involves if we were to be hired as an expert witness, or the services comprises being a trier of fact, or if our work was going to be rigorously challenged by each party, or if we were hired by an attorney to do work that will be protected by his attorney-client privilege. And also, performance audits performed pursuant to government auditing standards don't fall into this as well. So let's go back up to the requirements. Now that we understand some different types of subject matter that we might perform the attestation engagement on, we can get some more understanding of the requirements for performing these engagements. So let's go back up to, continuing on the requirements. So before beginning our engagement, as we will find out in later sections as well, the responsible party, that could be management or whoever is responsible for the subject matter that we are examining or reviewing, that person or entity is required to tell us or write out the assertion of what criteria the subject matter is under. And we'll see that in section 215. We are required to request such an assertion in writing when we're performing an attestation engagement. And so in relation to an agreed upon procedures engagement, if the responsible party, that's the one that's in charge of developing the subject matter, if that responsible party refuses to provide a written assertion, then we are required to disclose that refusal in the report. And details of this will certainly come into play once we get into section 215. But for now, let's just kind of understand that general concept that we're expecting the responsible party to provide us the assertion for what criteria the subject matter is under, and we're not responsible for providing that information or coming up with the criteria. We are merely engaged to go in and say whether or not that assertion on the subject matter is true or not. Also, we see here that this section on attestation engagement is not applicable to other AICPA types of engagements. So, for instance, statements on auditing standards, statements on standards for accounting and review services, or statements on standards for tax services. So these types of services are more in line with providing assurance over entire financial statements in line with financial reporting framework. Whereas we specify here in the attestation standards, we're providing assurance over an assertion over a subject matter. So it's a much narrower item that we are examining or reviewing than is here, which would be entire financial statements. And also we see that an attestation engagement may be part of a larger engagement. For example, it could be a feasibility study or a business acquisition study. It also includes an examination of prospective financial information. And so in those circumstances, the attestation standards apply only to the attestation portion of the engagement. So in this sense, we might have two engagements where one piece of the larger engagement falls under other standards, and then one piece of the engagement falls within the attestation standards that we're studying here. So this gives us a very high level understanding about attestation engagements and what we're getting into. And over the next several videos, we will get into more detailed requirements for performing attestation engagements, as well as specifically agreed upon procedures engagements, which is what this video series is on.